Well, hey guys, today we're going to talk about Standard 1.4, which is the Articles of Confederation. And before you walk out of here, you should be able to explain how weaknesses in the Articles led to the need for a new Constitution. So, some of you guys look at that and you're like, that doesn't make any sense at all. What's an Articles of Confederation? Let me paint a picture for you, and I think will help you start to make some sense of this. So the British are in their boats. They're sailing back home. They've lost the war, and we're like, ha, don't let the door hit you on the way out, suckers. And then it sort of slowly dawns on us that we need some sort of way to relate between the different colonies. And then we're like, the colonies aren't even colonies, they're independent states, which in our mind is like 13 independent countries. How are we going to interrelate? Well, the Continental Congress is going to put together a document called the Articles of Confederation. That's a first attempt at a government that unites, binds in some way these 13 independent states that used to be colonies. It explains how we're going to relate to each other after the British left. The idea is that sometimes we're going to want to work together, but there's this strong sense throughout it that the 13 former colonies are their own countries and nobody can tell them what to do. This is just, sometimes we have a loosely connected or a thread that loosely connects them. And so the state governments then have almost all the power because they see themselves as independent sovereign entities, which you might predict is going to cause some problems. Now, in class, it was at this point we looked at the articles. There are 13 of them. They're pretty straightforward. We're not going to do that in the notes right now. It's something I might suggest you do. I think it's in Google Classroom somewhere. So a couple things that define the government under the Articles of Confederation. First of all, they did have a Congress that was sort of a central government Congress. There's only one house that they'd get together. Everybody got one vote, or every state, I should say, got one vote. They didn't care how many people you sent. You could send 2, 3, 4 people from South Carolina, but South Carolina only gets one vote regardless of how many people we sent. They didn't have an executive. That's like the president who carries out the laws, because they assumed that the governor of the state would do that. So the Congress would make decisions. They'd take these decisions back to their states and they'd be like, here's something you should do, which is weird because the states also have a legislature of their own. And which one are you going to listen to? The one sitting right in front of you or the one from, when this Articles of Confederation Congress met? Probably the local one. There is also no judiciary system under the Articles of Confederation, again, because they figured that the South Carolina government has set up a judiciary. Why would we need another one? I'll give you a hint as to why. What if South Carolina needs to sue North Carolina? Where should we hear that? Here in South Carolina? Up in North Carolina? It's kind of a weird one. So the reason they put it together like this is that when they had the revolution, the states worked together pretty well. And we figure if we have a common cause, it's going to be fine. But what if we don't have a common cause? What if we have some issues where South Carolina wants something different than New York or Connecticut or Maryland? Well, maybe we're going to have some issues. Let's not talk about the issues first, though. Let's talk about what works. Everybody agrees that the government should be able to set up new territories. And so under the Articles of Confederation, we put together something that we call the Northwest Ordinance, or the Northwest Territories. These 5 states you see here in the map, they set up the land for them. They say that slavery is not going to exist there. And this proves that the Articles of Confederation has some power to do that. Under the Articles of Confederation, the 13 colonies, 13 states now, are going to come to an agreement with England about how the war should end. We meet in Paris, France, kind of a neutral territory of sorts. Not exactly neutral, but it's not here and it's not England. Okay, so good enough. And this officially sets us free from England. Now you might say, doesn't the Declaration of Independence? Yeah, that's another point you could argue. It's a question of perspective. If you go home and you tell your parents, I'm not your child anymore, I'm going to be emancipated, cool, but it isn't until the judge actually emancipates you that you're free, right? So in our mind, the Declaration of Independence frees us because Thomas Jefferson says, we're done, peace out, England. England would say it's the Treaty of Paris where they finally say, okay, you are free, we have no claim on you anymore. So there's a little difference between perspectives. Under the Articles of Confederation, Congress can raise an army and they can declare war, which is, something a government has to be able to do. There's a problem. Actually, there are lots of problems. And the first big problem is, by itself, enough to kind of make this thing, done. And that is that the central government under the Articles of Confederation cannot raise new taxes. They can only request funds from the states. Okay. So I said a couple slides ago, the government can raise an army, but how do you pay for the war? How do you pay for the soldiers? How do you get them uniforms and guns and bullets and boats? It's going to be really hard. Maybe South Carolina feels like, yeah, we should go to war. But Georgia's like, nah, we don't want to go to war. So we're going to pay for it and they're not? That's a problem. In fact, it's a problem almost immediately. There's this thing that happens up in Massachusetts where a guy named Daniel Shea and his friends, who had been soldiers in the Revolutionary War, had been promised some money. Okay, they've been promised a pension. That's like a retirement fund for soldiers. Okay, well, lots of people get pensions, not just soldiers, but in this case, it's soldiers. They're promised if you fight in the Revolutionary War, we will continue to pay you a pension afterwards, which is really kind of awesome. The only problem is the government can't tax. So where's it going to get the money to pay Daniel Shea and his boys? Well, it's not. There's a depression that hits, and so their farms aren't doing super well. And so the bank is coming and saying, we need the money or we're going to have to foreclose on your farm. And Daniel Shea's like, well, the government's supposed to give me money, but they're not. So this isn't great. So he and his friends grab their guns and they head down to the courthouses and they surround them. The idea is if you can't get into the courthouse, you're not going to be able to finalize the foreclosure proceedings on my farm. And the government could stop it if they could raise an army to go out there and put him down, but they can't because nobody wants to join an army that isn't going to get paid, right? So it's just this obvious event that makes us realize, shoot, this is broken. So the war is over, but the British won't leave. We still have British troops out to the Western Front. It's kind of crazy. The word's not coming. You know what I mean. Out west, okay, near the Appalachian Mountains. England won't immediately resume trade with the colonies. The Spanish won't give us access to the port of New Orleans. I don't really care that you know all these things. I just want you to understand that we have all these little bitty problems. Now, we could deal with them, except that under the Articles, when it comes to what your state does for a trade deal with Spain or with England, your state would have to go to those countries and make their own deal, which means we might get a different deal with England than what Virginia gets or than what Maryland gets. That's really weird. Also, who's going to take us seriously if we don't have any funds to pay an army? We're going to be like, yeah, you guys need to get out of those forts or we're going to come. Yeah, how are we going to do that? They know we're not serious because nobody wants to join our army because we can't raise the funds. On top of that, the central government itself has very little authority. They can request things, but the idea is that the central government is supposed to have exactly the same amount of power as the state government. That's the idea. But when it's exactly the same and there's a conflict, who wins? Well, that's kind of in doubt here, and the reality is it goes to the state because the governors have to respond to the people of their state. They don't have to worry about, what happens 4 states away. You might be looking at this pizza thinking, wow, what is that? Well, here's the thing. You can't amend the Articles of Confederation unless you get unanimous consent from all the states. Now, you might say, well, clearly if taxation is a problem, let's just add it back in. Guys, the pizza here is going to help me illustrate a point. What if I come into class and I say, I'm going to buy you all a pizza? The only catch is you all have to agree on all the toppings. That's going to be tough. In my family, we like bacon and black olives and banana peppers and onions. That's pretty much what we get. Sometimes like tomatoes. And some of you guys are like, that's gross. Some of you guys don't like any of those things. Guys, that's a pizza. That's not changing your entire government to allow taxation. If we can't agree on the pizza, there's no way that 13 different states are going to agree on how to change the government. So there's an understanding that this document, the Articles of Confederation, is kind of fundamentally broken. And so what happens is that the states agreed to send delegates to Philadelphia to try to fix them. They're like, yeah, we know it's going to be tough. Let's give it a shot. They work on it for 5 days. Let me go back. Only 12 of the 13 states show. Rhode Island doesn't, which already is a problem if you need unanimity, right? It means all of them have to agree. After 5 days, though, they realize this isn't going to work, and they decide to start a brand new document that you would know as the United States Constitution. Guys, hopefully that is helpful for you. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Shoot me an email. Otherwise, I will see you next time.